What if everything you've been told about the dangers of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere by mainstream media journalists and by politicians was actually just complete nonsense? Well, a new paper published by a York University scientist and Princeton University scientist actually shows that carbon dioxide is not responsible for raising global temperatures. It's the kind of thing you would want to learn more about, given that carbon dioxide in our atmosphere seems to be the source of all the climate hysteria coming from the Canadian government. It's the reason why we have to have a carbon tax. It's the reason why you won't be allowed to drive or buy a new gas-powered car in the future. Joining us now on the show is Dr. Jim Mason, a nuclear scientist with an extensive background in analyzing complex data, particularly in the context of climate change. Dr. Mason, you recently published in C2C Journal an article called "A Planet That Might Not Need Saving. Can CO2 Even Drive Global Temperatures?" First, just take us through the points that you're making here in this very interesting article.
Well, the article was actually based on two papers that I came across in the scientific literature. One in particular seems to be quite compelling to me. It's an experimental piece of work that was done in Poland by three researchers that actually measured the amount of radiant energy that was absorbed in a column of air as they controlled the level of carbon dioxide in that column, using a source of energy that was very reflective of the long wavelength radiation type of thing that would come from the Earth's surface. And they found a rather remarkable thing. Rather than the amount of energy increasing indefinitely, as you will, as the concentration of carbon dioxide increased in the air column, it actually tapered off very quickly and started to approach asymptotically to a maximum, so that eventually you get to a point where, even though you're increasing the level of carbon dioxide in the air column, it's not absorbing any more energy. And in fact, they've taken some measurements off their graph. They determined that the concentration at which 95% of the incident energy that was eventually going to be absorbed, that's 95% of this maximum, occurred at a concentration that was less than 1/10 of the current concentration in the atmosphere, which means really, since that time, additional carbon dioxide has really had very little impact on the climate. So I found that pretty interesting because it's kind of nice experimental physics. And so that's why I wrote the article.
So essentially, the idea that carbon dioxide is going to kill the planet, what we've been force-fed by the Canadian government and many of these NGOs, the United Nations, that's not exactly accurate, is it, after this?
Well, according to this experimental results, that would be the case. Yeah, that adding more carbon dioxide to the atmosphere is having essentially no effect on the amount of additional energy that's being absorbed into the atmosphere from the radiant energy coming off the Earth's surface. So it can't be having the impact on the climate that we've been led to believe it's having.
So if this is still being pushed on us, I guess the next question is this the result of scientists being wrong, or is there another motivation behind why they're pushing this ideology regarding carbon, being destructive for the planet?
Well, that would be pretty speculative, and kind of, as a scientist, I prefer to deal with facts and evidence. And I think one of the things that people may not understand is that scientific disciplines often get captured by something that a philosopher of science called Thomas Kuhn referred to as a ruling paradigm. And it's basically a presupposition about the nature of things that scientists use as the framework for interpreting their data. And it just never gets questioned. Probably the classic example of that is the paradigm about the geocentric nature of the universe that was formulated by Aristotle and prevailed for like hundreds of years. Even in spite of all of the evidence that it didn't work, people still made the evidence fit in that ruling paradigm. And so I think possibly that's what's happened. For whatever reason, we, the scientific community, people in general, got fixated on this idea that carbon dioxide, particularly carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels, because if you look at all of the UN documentation that surrounds the IPCC, that's a very fundamental premise right from the start, that climate change is caused by humans, and the cause of that is fossil fuel that is burned by humans. So we became fixated on that, and we, in effect, forced all of the evidence, all of the data, all of the observations to fit that particular premise and interpreted them in various and sundry ways to make sure that that happened. So why we got there, that's really another question.
Right. The next question I have for you is regarding the idea behind why we're being forced into EVs and why the government is mandating that all vehicle sales will be electric vehicle sales in really a short period of time. This seems like a significant change being driven by science, which, as you've pointed out and through this experiment, doesn't seem to be accurate. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think it's just a knock-on of this. We got to stop emitting carbon dioxide, and internal combustion engines emit carbon dioxide. Therefore, they must be stopped. And the only alternative at the moment really are these EVs, and they seem to be becoming less and less attractive to people. The EV market is kind of flattened now. I think we've got past the stage of all of the people who want to have one for virtue signaling or status seeking or whatever is past, and the rest of us just can't afford them. So why the government is forcing, I think, is just a natural extension of this view that carbon dioxide, we must stop putting carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And if this Polish work is correct, then it's not actually going to make any difference. Now, an interesting thing about the mandate for EVs, I've just done an analysis on this, and it looks to me like the real effect of that between now and 2035 is going to be a collapse in the new car market. People are just not going to be able to afford to buy EVs, and then the number of total vehicles that can be sold is going to be driven by the number of EVs that are sold, and therefore the total number of vehicles will not keep up with what historically has been the evidence, and the new car market's just going to disappear.
How significant is this study in your field of study and in the world of climate science? Is this getting a lot of attention from people at that level? Has it made an impact?
Not that I've been able to see. Actually, I haven't been able to find much of anything. Now, the paper to which I referred was only published in March of this year, so that's kind of relatively new paper. There was another paper published in 2020 by a couple of physicists, one at York University and one at Princeton, that approached the problem from a different perspective. Actually, they sort of started from the details. They looked at the radiation absorption spectrum of carbon dioxide and indeed all of the other greenhouse gases, and looked at the spectrum of emission of long wavelength radiation, and kind of did a cross multiplication of those two and then added them up. And they found much the same thing. They found that this forcing function that is used in climate change analysis for greenhouse gases was overstated, in their words, by a factor of 4, by an order of 4 orders of magnitude. Sorry, not a factor of 4, but 4 orders of magnitude, which is a factor of 10,000. So the degree to which we have been saying that carbon dioxide and the other greenhouse gases is causing climate change has been overstated by a factor of 10,000, which means it's become pretty insignificant already.
I feel like a lot of people who are advocating for climate change solutions have their hearts in the right place. They want to see the planet do better, and they are concerned about the future of the planet. With this information, what do you think would be the best way to protect the planet going forward? It appears as though EVs is not the solution. Also, we know that EVs aren't really good for the planet either, right?
Well, yes, there's a lot of issues with the production of EVs. But in terms of, if you like, I can't remember how you just put it, but in terms of protecting the planet or saving the planet,
Right.
we need to figure out what it is we're trying to protect it from.
Right.
The sort of premise of climate change, the current climate change narrative is we've got to protect it from overheating and burning up. And the way to do that is to stop emitting carbon dioxide. But, there have been periods in the past when the climate has warmed up and then cooled off. We got the Roman warm period, we got the medieval warm period, and then we got the period when it did it in reverse. It cooled down in the Little Ice Age and then warmed back up. And all of that really happened without carbon dioxide from burning fossil fuels, because it was well before that. And so something's going on other than that would appear to be causing climate change. And if we're going to try and protect the planet from that, we got to understand what that is. And maybe there isn't anything we can do to protect the planet from that because it's just happening. And what we have to do is take necessary mitigation measures to protect us from the consequences of that, like don't build in floodplains and stuff like that.
One of the things that I found to be very interesting is the fact that we know this government that we have right now is very strong on climate change, and they're really concerned about increasing carbon levels from Canada. That's why they want to have the carbon tax. That's why they want to have all these policies. But for example, when it came to the forest fires in Canada, the forest fires emitted so much carbon into the atmosphere that the forest fires alone were one of the largest polluters in the entire world in 2023. Do you think that this government has it all backwards on climate?
Well, yes, that's an interesting point. And you really have to look at Canada, I think, at Canada's contribution to the problem, if we want to call it that. You do a simple Pareto analysis, which is done all of the time, and you find out we're a pretty insignificant part of the problem. In fact, this net zero electrical grid that they're on about, our electrical grid emits 47 megatons of CO2 annually. China, since about 1990, has been increasing its annual emissions by 350 megatons every year, and that shows no sign of stopping. So between now and 2035, China, if that keeps on that trajectory, China's emissions will increase by something over 4,000 megatons a year compared to the 47 megatons we're going to save. And in fact, between now and 2035, if China keeps on this trajectory, they will emit enough carbon dioxide to increase the level in the atmosphere by about 23 parts per million. So that's where the real problem is. Nobody seems to be talking about that. If you're going to make a reduction, you got to start with the big emitters and reduce those.
Yeah, it seems as though focusing on our own country when China and India and other large polluters aren't actually changing their practices at all is a complete waste of our time. It's not useful at all, and it may even have detrimental impacts on our country. We've seen the carbon tax measures have been really difficult for the Canadian economy, and they're going to be even worse going forward. We've heard even very vocal supporters of the natural gas and oil industry, like Danielle Smith, commit to reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Again, I guess this idea for reaching net zero is completely misplaced, and hopefully, as your reporting has pointed out, that maybe politicians should take a look at this and realize, hold on, this net zero idea isn't going to do anything for the planet or for Canada.
Well, I think they should at least have a look at this recent paper that was published. Have we really got the right handle on this? Are we really doing something that's going to have an effect? Or is our 47 megatons really worth the cost to people? Just read that Vancouver or British Columbia or Vancouver have outlawed natural gas furnaces in all new construction. So they all have to have electric furnaces now. So that's going to have a big impact on people's home heating costs. Is this the right thing to do? I think we need to take a serious look at this recent paper and find out if it is.
Absolutely. It could have some seriously positive implications if our leaders perhaps change their approach on this and put the Canadian people first, and not be swept up with this climate hysteria that appears to be taking place. That's all the time we have. Dr. Jim Mason, thank you very much for joining us. If you want to read Dr. Jim Mason's article in the C2C Journal, you can find a link to it in the description of this video. It is A Planet That Might Not Need Saving. Can CO2 Even Drive Global Temperature? With that, Dr. Jim Mason, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Harrison. Pleasure talking with you.